Welcome once more to our UNO author series. Dr. Bing Chen of the Department of Electronics Engineering Technology and I, Darrel Berg, one of the campus pastors at UNO, are discussing a series of books by Loren Eiseley. We began our series with the discussion of Eiseley's autobiography, which was entitled All the Strange Hours. And then the second book which we discussed was his first book entitled The Immense Journey. Now today, Dr. Bing Chen and I are going to discuss one of his later books, not his last book, but one of his later books. This was published in 1968, and it's entitled The Unexpected Universe. We've had a good opportunity to talk about the life and times of Loren Eiseley, about his personal biography, as well as the significance of his literature. And as we've discussed the meaning of Eiseley, it seems that he's in the same league with the great nature writers. He's in league with Henry David Thoreau. He's in league with the famous British naturalist Richard Jefferies. He's in league with Wordsworth, nature's poet. He is a poet, he is an essayist, he is a fossil hunter. And today we're going to talk about this book, which in many ways has a more pronounced theological dimension than any of his others, but it also is more obscure. And you know, Dr. Chen, as I read this book, I was thinking about an old-time Baptist preacher named Charles Haddon Spurgeon, who once said, "The Lord told us to feed his sheep, but some preachers put it up so high that only the giraffes can reach it." and a lot of the time when I'm slogging through this book, I'm thinking, hey, he's putting it up there for the giraffes, but what about the sheep? I don't suppose you had that difficulty at all.
No, I had more than that. I was probably stuck on the first chapter for a long time. Because there's so much meat. If many of the people who are with us today have read the Eiseley books, I think particularly in The Unexpected Universe, you could just spend days on each chapter ruminating on what it is he's trying to say, and just being enthralled by the message that he's delivering and the
metaphorical richness. We start off with the ghost continent. What, in your opinion, is the ghost continent?
Well, it's interesting. He talks about the several of the great voyages. The first great story, of course, is of Ulysses and the search for Ithaca, and it's basically a metaphor for the journey that mankind has taken. And the second voyager that he brings into this, and he looks at the similarities between Ulysses and then James Cook in 1768 in terms of his search. He was sent out with secret admiralty orders, ostensibly to go map out the islands of Tahiti, but his secret message was to discover this undiscovered continent, terra incognita. And he was given that secret mission, and his men were not told of this. They grumbled, well, why are we sailing south of this unknown parallel and ice on our riggings, and we keep almost running into these icebergs? And the British had heard of an undiscovered continent. And then finally, there's the voyage by Charles Darwin. And in each of these, when he talks about the ghost continent, I feel that he's talking about the continent of man's intellect, the conscious and the unconscious. And then he looks at the voyages taken by Ulysses and Darwin and James Cook. And then, of course, the metaphors start flowing very richly.
These were all immense journeys in terms of historic and scientific significance. Think of the difference that the journey of James Cook made in history. the discovery of Australia, and the migration of the people from the British Empire to Australia and New Zealand. And think of the scientific significance of Darwin. Actually, in a later passage, he points out that it was Darwin's voyage that freed us up from the anthropocentric concept of the universe. It would never be possible, again, for us to have the idea that man is the center of the universe and humanity is the master of things after Darwin. So each of these journeys, in a way, is just a symbolic journey of the inner journey of humanity.
Right. If we take a look at the time that Darwin wrote, Isaac Newton, of course, with the laws of universal gravitation, Newton had basically created a very clockwork universe, one that was predictable. And given the context of the times in England of that time, it created a great deal of comfort for Christian England of the time. And what Darwin would come out and say, no, yes, there's a great deal of truth in that, but you also have to understand, as Darwin would say, there's a power hidden in time and isolation that could transmute not only men, but all living things into wavering shadows. And that is very, very disturbing when you're used to a very structured world and a structured universe.
Oh, yes. Well, here we have Newton, and here we have Browning, even the poets, capturing Newtonian physics. God's in his heaven, all's right with the world. And now here comes Darwin, wham, bam. Everything that's fastened down is coming loose.
Exactly.
So Eiseley really makes much of this, the necessity of chaos. We don't like chaos, do we? We don't like what we can't control. We don't like what we can't organize. But Eiseley sees positive value in tumult and ferment and agitation.
Right.
That's a hopeful sign.
Yeah.
Conflict.
Exactly. That which is unknown in the Ulysses story, he keeps coming back to Ulysses throughout and Darwin's journey, which is one of the main themes of the book. And he talks about Circe, and Circe who transmutes the crew into a series of animals. And he then likens her and her power into what might be described as the shape-shifting nature of the universe. And in this voyage, looking at his men, his crew, there's uncertainty, there's violence, there's sexual irresponsibility, there are inordinate urges and hungers that drive his men. And as he looks at this journey, and Ulysses being the rational leader of this group, and finally getting home to Ithaca, and he talks about man's need to be connected, well, back to the ancient world. He talks about the fact that Ulysses is not recognized by another human. He's recognized by his dog Argos. After 19 years, the first thing to recognize him after this voyage is his animal, is his dog. And he talks about the bond between man and beast, a tie that runs beyond the cities into some remote glade in a far-off forest where man accepted the help of his animal kin. He thinks that men en masse forget the origins of their need. They still bring the wolfhound into the cities with them, into city apartments, although man and dog sit in brooding discomfort. The magic that gleams an instant between Argos and Ulysses is both the recognition of diversity and the need for affection across what he calls the wandering, insatiable, the need that man has with his curiosity and very desolate, a kind of a loneliness. And he describes the voyage of mankind in these terms. Do not forget your brethren, nor the green world from which you sprang. To do so is to invite disaster.
You know, I'm tempted, Bing, to talk about Eiseley's kinship for animals his fondness of animals, his ability to relate to animals with much more satisfaction than his ability to relate to human beings, and his eulogizing of animals, this dog that he calls Wolf, and in his own biography, the little dog that he befriended that ran along beside the freight train that he had hopped, and his lifetime regret that he hadn't picked that little dog up and taken him along. But before we leave the lost continent, I want us to understand that his concept of that lost continent, of what we could call Antarctica, or the Antipodean world, that is the subconscious. And that is where the spontaneous combustion takes place. That is what Freud discovered, that whole continent of the subconscious. And Freud was another adventurer. Freud was another explorer who was on an immense journey. And when we get down into that bipolar world, or that Antipodean world, that is where we get the surprises. And that's the world that the poets are talking about. For example, when Carl Sandburg says, "There is a wolf in me, fangs pointed for the tearing of gashes, red tongue for the hot lapping of blood, and I got the wolf from the wilderness, and the wilderness will not let it go." That's what Eiseley is saying to us, that we run away from that ghost continent at great cost to ourselves. We had better recognize what is down there, he's saying.
Yeah, he looks at our telescopes into space as we peer to, right now we're somewhere between 12 and 15 billion years into the past, and we have our interests in Star Wars and traveling to unknown places. The most popular television show is Star Trek, The Next Generation. We talk about these yearnings, and yet he says that without a similar trip in terms of distance, into what drives men's souls, that we are open to tremendous catastrophe and calamity. He says that going to the ice ages, he looks at the gray icebergs of our minds as being something unfathomable and an undiscovered country, you might say.
Mm-hmm. And he talks about those dragons. Only when Eiseley talks about dragons, he's not talking necessarily about green monsters. He's not necessarily talking about dinosaurs. He's talking about the glaciers. He's talking about those vast white dragons who stretch their tentacles down over the continent. And those are the dragons who have stimulated us to become what we have become. So there is a message of such vastness. Just think what that means. See, if it weren't, Eiseley doesn't say all this. He needs a preacher like me to give all these interpretations. See, we got the old King James version of stuff here in these books, and then Bing helps me to understand what it means so I can translate it down into the common realm. But if it hadn't been for these icebergs, friends, we wouldn't be here. We reach back to that Permian age. And we reach back to what motivated those prehistoric reptiles to come out of the water, because it was just too cold. And once they got out of the water, they migrated to a more salubrious climate where they were able to grow and expand and become. Now, we're talking 250 million years ago, friends. But had it not been for the ice, we wouldn't have been motivated toward consciousness. Now think of the vastness think of the consequences of that point of view, and apply it to your own life today. If it isn't for the ice, we don't become what we're destined to become.
Yes, two great periods. The Permian period, just prior to the